What if the greatest maritime disaster in history was not caused by a stray iceberg, but by a secret hidden deep within the ship's very own belly? What if the RMS Titanic was already doomed long before it even left the bustling docks of Southampton? You have been told the traditional story of the magnificent, unsinkable ship, the tragic night in the freezing North Atlantic, and the unforgiving ice that tore its metallic flesh apart. But what if I told you that for nearly 3 weeks prior to the collision, a massive, unyielding fire was raging uncontrollably inside the Titanic's hull? A fire that the ship's owners knew about, actively concealed from the public, and forced their crew to fight in secret. How does a supposedly unsinkable ship succumb so quickly to a glancing blow from an iceberg? Today, we are going to tear down a century of accepted history and uncover the hidden truth that textbooks and blockbuster movies conveniently left out. Are you truly ready to discover the real reason the Titanic rests in pieces at the bottom of the ocean? To understand the magnitude of this cover-up, we must first transport ourselves back to the early 20th century. The year is 1912. The world is in the grip of the Industrial Revolution, and the transatlantic crossing is the ultimate battleground for technological supremacy. The White Star Line, a titan of the shipping industry, was locked in a fierce, uncompromising rivalry with the Cunard Line. Cunard had recently launched the Lusitania and the Mauretania, ships that were breaking speed records and capturing the imagination of the global public. White Star Line needed an answer. Their strategy was not to compete purely on speed, but on unprecedented scale, unmatched luxury, and the bold promise of absolute safety. Thus, the Olympic-class liners were born, with the Titanic designed to be the undisputed crown jewel of the fleet. The pressure to launch the Titanic on time and without a single flaw was astronomical. The reputation of the White Star Line, the financial backing of J.P. Morgan, and the pride of the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast were all resting on the maiden voyage of this colossal vessel. Delay was simply not an option. It was within this cauldron of immense pressure and corporate ambition that a deadly secret was born. Deep within the cavernous depths of the Titanic, far below the glittering chandeliers of the first-class dining saloons and the elegant promenades, lay the ship's lifeblood, the coal bunkers. The Titanic was a voracious beast, requiring over 600 tons of coal every single day to keep its massive steam engines churning. To accommodate this enormous appetite, the ship was equipped with gigantic coal bunkers, towering structural spaces designed to hold thousands of tons of fuel. But coal, particularly the type used in the early 20th century, harbors a dark and dangerous characteristic. When large quantities of coal are stored in confined, poorly ventilated spaces, the dust and the pressure can initiate a chemical reaction. The coal begins to absorb oxygen, generating heat. Slowly, silently, the temperature rises. If left unchecked, this process leads to spontaneous combustion. And this is exactly what happened in coal bunker number 6. Long before the passengers in their fine silks and tailored suits began to board the ship, while the Titanic was still in Belfast, a fire sparked to life deep within its belly. It was not a sudden explosion, but a smoldering, persistent, and incredibly intense coal fire. By the time the crew realized the severity of the situation, the fire had already established a firm grip inside the massive bunker. You might wonder, why didn't they simply extinguish it? Fighting a coal bunker fire in 1912 was not like putting out a house fire. You could not simply spray water on it. The sheer volume of coal meant that water would barely scratch the surface. And in some cases, the introduction of moisture could actually accelerate the chemical reaction or produce highly explosive gases. The only known method to defeat a fire of this magnitude was to manually dig it out. The crew, a group of men known as the Black Gang, due to the permanent layer of coal dust covering their skin, were ordered to shovel the burning coal out of the bunker and feed it directly into the ship's furnaces. It was a grueling, hellish task. These men worked in suffocating heat, breathing in toxic fumes, desperately trying to empty a bunker that held hundreds of tons of smoldering fuel. But the fire was relentless. It burned at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. This brings us to the first major piece of the cover-up. The management of the White Star Line, including the company's managing director J. Bruce Ismay, were acutely aware of the fire. Yet, canceling the maiden voyage was unthinkable. The financial ramifications and the public relations disaster would have been devastating. Instead, a chilling decision was made. The Titanic would sail as planned. The secret would be kept. When the Titanic arrived in Southampton to pick up its passengers, a peculiar event occurred, one that historians and maritime experts have puzzled over for decades. Usually, ships of that size were docked with their starboard side facing the port, allowing passengers to board elegantly and showcasing the ship's most pristine profile. However, the Titanic was docked in reverse, port side facing the dock. Why? Photographic evidence discovered years later provides a horrifying answer. High-resolution scans of photographs taken of the Titanic before it departed Southampton reveal a massive, 30-foot-long dark mark on the ship's starboard hull. This dark smear was located exactly adjacent to coal bunker number 6. The heat from the raging fire inside had been so intense that it had literally scorched the exterior steel of the ship. By docking the ship backwards, the White Star Line successfully hid this ominous scar from the thousands of excited passengers, journalists, and well-wishers who had gathered to witness the historic departure. As the Titanic set sail into the open ocean, the luxurious facade above deck masked a desperate battle below. The passengers danced, dined, and marveled at the ship's grandeur, completely oblivious to the fact that they were floating on a ticking time bomb. Below the waterline, the Black Gang continued their desperate fight against the inferno. The fire raged on for days, right up until the fateful night of the collision. Now, we must examine the most critical and fatal consequence of this secret fire. The intense heat, estimated to be up to 1,000 degrees Celsius, was pressing directly against the ship's steel hull and its crucial watertight bulkheads for weeks. Modern metallurgical science tells us exactly what happens to steel under these conditions. When exposed to such prolonged and extreme heat, steel loses its structural integrity. It becomes brittle. Experts estimate that the steel surrounding coal bunker number 6 had its strength reduced by up to 75%. This scientific fact changes the entire narrative of the sinking. The traditional story suggests that the Titanic was simply unlucky, striking a uniquely massive iceberg that managed to puncture a statistically impossible number of watertight compartments. But the reality is far more terrifying. The iceberg did not strike a pristine, unsinkable wall of steel. It struck a compromised, weakened, and brittle section of the hull. The exact location where the iceberg scraped along the side of the Titanic corresponds perfectly with the location of the scorched hull and coal bunker number 6. The iceberg was not the sole murderer. It was merely the final blow to a ship that had already been mortally wounded from the inside. Furthermore, The fire explains another enduring mystery of the Titanic's voyage: its reckless speed. For over a century, the blame for the ship's high speed through a known ice field has been placed entirely on the arrogance of Captain Edward Smith and the pressure from J. Bruce Ismay to make headlines by arriving in New York ahead of schedule. While corporate arrogance certainly played a role, there was a far more urgent mechanical reason for the dangerous speed. Remember the only way to fight the coal fire? The stokers had to shovel the burning coal out of the bunker and into the furnaces as fast as humanly possible. This massive, unexpected influx of fuel into the ship's boilers created an excess of steam. To relieve the dangerous pressure building up in the boilers, the ship had to move fast. The Titanic was essentially a runaway train, speeding through the dark, icy waters not merely to break a record, but because the men below deck were desperately trying to consume the burning fuel before the entire bunker exploded. The captain could not simply stop the ship or slow down significantly without risking a catastrophic boiler explosion. The ship was trapped by its own hidden inferno. When the lookout, Frederick Fleet, spotted the iceberg looming out of the darkness, the ship was moving too fast to turn in time. The weakened steel tore open like a tin can. The watertight compartments, designed to keep the ship afloat even if multiple sections were breached, failed. The fire had warped and damaged the bulkheads, allowing the freezing ocean water to spill uncontrollably from one compartment to the next. The unsinkable ship was dying, and the seeds of its destruction had been planted in a Belfast coal bunker long before it ever saw an iceberg. The tragedy of the Titanic is not just a story of a ship sinking. It is a story of a massive institutional cover-up. After the disaster, which claimed the lives of over 1,500 men, women, and children, inquiries were held in both the United States and Great Britain. The British inquiry, led by Lord Mersey, was heavily influenced by the shipping establishment. The goal was not necessarily to uncover the absolute truth, but to protect the reputation of the British shipping industry. During the hearings, the surviving stokers and crew members were questioned. The issue of the coal fire was briefly raised. A few surviving firemen testified about the blazing bunker, the scorched steel, and their desperate days fighting the flames. However, their testimonies were quickly dismissed, minimized, or entirely ignored in the final official reports. Lord Mersey and the board concluded that the high speed and the iceberg were the sole causes of the disaster. Acknowledging the fire would have meant acknowledging gross negligence by the White Star Line. It would have meant admitting that the ship was sent out to sea in a compromised and dangerous state. It would have meant massive lawsuits and a crippling blow to the British economy. The truth was buried beneath a mountain of official documents and the prevailing narrative of an unpredictable act of nature. The story of the iceberg was clean, tragic, and unpreventable. The story of a corporate cover-up, a raging fire, and compromised steel was messy, criminal, and highly damaging. So, history chose the iceberg. For decades, the silent victims of the Titanic, the stokers who fought the fire in the dark, the passengers who were denied the truth, and the ship itself, remained trapped in a fabricated narrative. It is only in recent years, with the discovery of the hidden photographs and the application of modern metallurgical analysis, that the dark ghost of coal bunker number 6 has finally emerged from the depths. The Titanic did not just hit an iceberg. It sailed into the ice field crippled, burning, and fundamentally compromised by the very people who built it and owned it. It was a tragedy of hubris, corporate greed, and a fatal disregard for human life. The next time you hear the romanticized tale of the unsinkable ship, remember the Black Gang. Remember the hidden flames, and ask yourself, how many other established truths in our history are built on a foundation of carefully constructed lies? The ocean holds many secrets, but the most dangerous ones are often the ones created by men long before the ship ever leaves the shore.